Mom, they haven't eaten since yesterday. The little boy's voice was barely louder than a whisper. He wasn't talking to his mother. He was speaking to the woman standing beside him, the billionaire CEO whose name was printed across every banner at the grand charity event. The cameras kept flashing. Reporters waited for another polished speech about generosity. Volunteers smiled for photographs. No one noticed the boy's trembling hand pointing past the decorated tables toward a man sitting quietly on the curb with his 8-year-old daughter. The little girl was pretending to color in an old notebook. Her father was pretending he wasn't hungry. They had both quietly refused the free meal line. The CEO glanced toward them for barely a second before turning back to the cameras. Her security chief leaned closer. "Ma'am, the press conference starts in 30 seconds. She didn't answer. The boy whispered again. He told his daughter he already ate, but he hasn't had anything since yesterday. For the first time that morning, the CEO stopped smiling. She looked at the single father, really looked at him. The man never raised his hand, never asked for help, never tried to get anyone's attention. He simply wrapped his worn jacket around his daughter because the morning wind had grown colder. Then something happened that left more than 500 people standing in complete silence, ignoring every camera, ignoring every executive, ignoring the governor waiting on stage. The CEO stepped away from the podium, walked straight across the red carpet, and stopped in front of the poor single dad. What she said next made every executive in her company stare in disbelief, because the most powerful woman in the state looked at the man everyone thought was just another hungry father, and quietly asked, "Mr. Rowan Mercer, where have you been for the last 8 years?" The single dad slowly lifted his eyes. He recognized her instantly, but the expression on his face wasn't surprise. It was disappointment, because he already knew. She was about to uncover a truth that would destroy everything her company believed about its own past. The applause rolled across the city square like distant thunder. Hundreds of people stood beneath white tents decorated with blue ribbons bearing the logo of Aldridge Foods International, one of America's largest food manufacturers. Television cameras lined the front row. Local politicians smiled beside oversized donation checks. Volunteers in matching shirts carried trays of hot meals toward families waiting behind metal barriers. It looked like generosity. It looked like hope. It looked exactly the way a billion-dollar charity event was supposed to look. But not everyone standing there had come for the cameras. Near the back of the crowd, where the reporters never pointed their lenses, 11-year-old Mason Carter tightened his grip around his younger sister Emma's hand. She was only 6, her cheeks pale beneath messy blonde hair tied into uneven pigtails. Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the steaming food, not because she wanted dessert, because she hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Mason leaned down. "Just wait a little longer." She nodded without complaining. Children who had known hunger long enough rarely complained anymore. Across the square, a black SUV stopped beside the stage. The crowd immediately shifted. Executives straightened their jackets. Security officers adjusted their earpieces. The woman stepping from the vehicle was Eleanor Pierce, 38 years old, CEO of Aldridge Foods International. Magazine covers called her America's Iron Executive. Financial television called her the youngest woman ever to double a Fortune 500 food company in less than 6 years. Her employees called her brilliant. Her competitors called her dangerous. Very few people called her kind. She wore a charcoal business suit despite the warm spring morning, her silver watch catching the sunlight as she walked toward the stage with practiced confidence. Every movement looked rehearsed. Every smile lasted exactly long enough for photographers. To the world, she appeared perfectly composed. Inside, she was exhausted. 3 cities in 2 days. 4 board meetings. 1 investor conference. Now another charity event organized by her public relations department. Her assistant whispered while handing over today's schedule. 8-minute speech. Ribbon cutting. Photos with families. Interviews. Then airport. Eleanor nodded. Nothing unexpected. Nothing personal. Exactly how she preferred it. She believed emotions complicated decisions. Facts built companies. Feelings built headlines. Her late father had repeated those words throughout her childhood until they became something close to religion. As Eleanor climbed the stage steps, applause erupted again. Below the platform, Mason quietly watched. He wasn't looking at the CEO. He was looking past the stage, toward a man sitting alone beneath an old maple tree almost 50 yards away. The man wore faded blue jeans, worn work boots, and a gray flannel shirt whose sleeves had been rolled above strong, weathered forearms. Beside him sat a little girl drawing flowers inside an old notebook with pencils worn almost to nothing. Her father smiled every time she showed him another picture, even though his own stomach had been empty since yesterday morning. His name was Rowan Mercer, 40 years old, single father, former civil engineer, current handyman. Most people who passed him saw only another struggling father trying to survive. None of them knew that years earlier Rowan had designed emergency bridge systems used across 3 states. None of them knew why that career ended. Rowan preferred it that way. His daughter Lily, 8 years old, looked up from her drawing. "Dad, you really aren't hungry?" Rowan smiled gently. "I ate while you were asleep." It was a lie. Practiced one. Parents become experts at lying about hunger. Lily accepted the answer because she wanted to believe it. Then she tore a page from her notebook. On it she'd drawn their tiny apartment, the two of them holding hands. A bright yellow sun, one enormous tree, and beneath the picture she'd carefully written, "Home." Rowan swallowed hard before smiling again. "It's beautiful," she beamed. "You can hang it at work." He didn't tell her there hadn't been much work lately. The construction company he'd been repairing equipment for had closed 2 weeks earlier. Since then, every morning began with the same routine. Wake before sunrise. Search for day labor. Fix whatever people needed repaired. Return home hoping tomorrow looked better. Sometimes it did. Usually it didn't. Still, Lily had never gone to bed believing her father had given up. That mattered more than anything. Back near the food tents, volunteers began serving meals. The line stretched farther every minute. Families slowly moved forward. Except Rowan. He remained beneath the tree. Lily looked toward the line. "Dad, we're not getting food? We will. When? When everyone else has enough." She frowned. "But we're hungry." He gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "So are they." Lily looked at the long line again, then quietly nodded. She understood far more than any 8-year-old should. Across the square, Mason noticed everything. He watched Rowan refuse to join the crowd. Watched Lily pretending she wasn't staring at the food. Watched Rowan quietly tighten his belt another notch beneath his shirt. Mason recognized that movement immediately. His own father used to do exactly the same thing before he disappeared years earlier. It fooled children, not children who had lived through hunger themselves. Mason slowly turned toward Eleanor's stage. The CEO had just begun speaking. Today isn't simply about feeding families. It is about strengthening communities. The audience applauded. Mason barely heard another word. He tugged lightly on the sleeve of the elegant woman standing closest to the podium. She looked down in surprise. Security immediately noticed. One guard started forward. Eleanor raised a single finger without looking. The guard stopped. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Mason hesitated, then leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Ma'am, they haven't eaten." Eleanor glanced briefly toward the food tents. "The volunteers are serving everyone." He shook his head. "No, the man under the tree. He keeps telling his daughter he already ate. He didn't. He hasn't eaten since yesterday." For one brief second, time seemed strangely slow. Eleanor followed the direction of Mason's trembling finger. She saw Rowan sitting beneath the maple tree. Saw the little girl happily coloring. Saw the father smiling despite obvious exhaustion. Something about the image refused to leave her mind. Not because he looked poor. She'd seen poverty before. It was something else. His posture. The quiet dignity. The way he kept all attention focused on his daughter instead of himself. She had seen someone sit exactly like that once before. Years ago, when she was 16. Her father had been meeting with a young structural engineer inside company headquarters. She remembered passing the conference room, remembered seeing that same calm posture, that same steady expression. Before security escorted the man from the building. She never learned his name. The memory disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Her assistant interrupted. "Ma'am, the governor is waiting. The cameras are live." Eleanor looked toward the stage, then back toward Rowan. For reasons she couldn't explain, her prepared speech suddenly felt completely meaningless. And before anyone could stop her, she stepped away from the podium, straight off the red carpet, walking directly toward the quiet single father beneath the maple tree. 500 people turned to watch. The governor stopped clapping. Executives exchanged confused looks. Television cameras instantly swung away from the stage. No one understood what the CEO was doing, least of all Rowan Mercer. He looked up only when polished black shoes stopped in front of him. Lily smiled politely. "Hello." Eleanor barely noticed the little girl. Her eyes remained fixed on Rowan. She studied his face. Older now, more tired, a faint scar near his left eyebrow. But unmistakably, the same man she'd seen walking out of her father's headquarters 8 years ago. A name surfaced from somewhere deep in her memory. Before she could stop herself, she quietly asked, "Mr. Rowan Mercer, where have you been all these years?" For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The noise of the charity event seemed to disappear beneath the sound of distant traffic and fluttering flags. Rowan slowly stood, placing himself naturally between Eleanor and his daughter. Not aggressively, protectively. The habit of a single father who had spent years making sure nothing unexpected reached his child first. Lily looked up at the elegant woman standing before them. "Dad, do you know her?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left Eleanor's face. "I knew her father." Those 4 quiet words carried far more weight than anyone nearby realized. Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. "My father knew hundreds of engineers," she replied carefully. "Why would I remember you?" Rowan gave the smallest smile. "You probably shouldn't. It wasn't one of your family's better days." Before Eleanor could ask another question, her communications director hurried over, visibly panicked. "Ma'am, the governor is waiting. The media doesn't understand what's happening. The investors are watching this live." Eleanor didn't even turn around. "Tell them they'll wait." The director blinked. She had worked for Eleanor Pierce for 5 years. Never, not once, had she seen the CEO ignore a schedule. The executives standing near the stage began whispering among themselves. "What is she doing? Who is that man? Some homeless father? No. I've never seen the CEO react like this." Across the square, television cameras zoomed closer. Every network wanted to know why America's most disciplined CEO had abandoned her own event to speak with an unknown single father. Rowan noticed the cameras. His shoulders stiffened. He quietly reached for Lily's notebook. "Come on, sweetheart. We should go." Lily looked confused. "But we haven't eaten." "We'll find something later." She trusted him completely. Without another question, she slipped her tiny hand into his. They began walking away. Eleanor watched them take barely 6 steps before speaking again. "Mr. Mercer." Rowan stopped. Without turning around, he asked quietly, "Why now?" The question caught Eleanor completely off guard. "What do you mean? You had 8 years. Why today?" Silence. Because she had no answer. 8 years ago, she had never questioned what she'd been told. Her father had simply said one sentence. "Some people are brilliant engineers, but impossible to trust." She had believed him, until now. Behind them, Mason suddenly ran toward Rowan, holding 2 paper meal boxes. "I saved these. They were giving extras." He held them out shyly. "Please. For your daughter." Rowan looked at the boy, then at Emma standing several feet behind him. The little girl looked thinner than Lily. Far thinner. Rowan smiled gently. You and your sister eat first. We'll be all right. Mason shook his head. No. My dad used to say, if you find someone hungrier than you, they eat first. For the first time all morning, Rowan couldn't speak. Neither could Eleanor. Everything around them, the speeches, the cameras, the executives, suddenly felt painfully small. A hungry child, trying to feed another hungry child. Eleanor slowly knelt until she was eye level with Mason. What's your name? Mason. And your parents? The boy looked toward the ground. It's just me and Emma. The answer landed harder than she expected. Without another word, Eleanor stood. She turned toward the food tents, then toward her security chief. His name was Marcus Doyle, former Marine. He had protected executives for nearly 20 years. 80 meal boxes. He frowned. Ma'am. Now. He nodded instantly. Within minutes, every volunteer stopped serving individual meals. Entire tables of food began moving toward the children still waiting at the back of the line. The carefully planned media schedule collapsed. Nobody cared. Parents stared in disbelief as employees abandoned the VIP section and carried meals directly into the crowd. Reporters forgot their prepared questions. For the first time, the charity looked less like an advertisement and more like actual compassion. Eleanor turned back toward Rowan. I'd like to talk. He looked toward Lily, then at the dozens of cameras. Not here. She understood immediately. Then somewhere private. He hesitated. I don't own many places. My workshop. It's quiet. I'll come after Lily eats. Eleanor nodded. I'll meet you there. Her assistant stepped forward again. Ma'am. The board will be furious. Without taking her eyes off Rowan, Eleanor answered. They can practice. Meanwhile, 3 black luxury SUVs parked across the street. No one at the charity noticed, but someone inside the lead vehicle was watching every second through tinted glass. Damian Cross, Chief Operating Officer of Aldridge Foods International. 51. Perfect suits, perfect smile, perfect reputation. He slowly lowered the tablet showing the live broadcast. His expression remained calm. Too calm. He turned toward the man sitting beside him. You recognize him? The man swallowed. Yes. Damian's fingers tapped lightly against the leather armrest. I thought your report said Rowan Mercer disappeared. He did. So why? Is Eleanor talking to him? Neither man answered. Damian continued watching the screen. His eyes narrowed. Find out where Mercer lives. And this time, don't lose him. Back at the charity event, Lily finally finished eating. It wasn't much, just soup, bread, and fruit. Yet she smiled as though someone had handed her the world. She quietly wrapped the second piece of bread inside a napkin. Rowan noticed. Saving it. She nodded. For breakfast. He kissed the top of her head. We'll have something better tomorrow. She smiled. You always say that. Because one day it'll be true. Nearby, Eleanor heard every word. And something inside her refused to let the conversation end there. She had spent years approving billion-dollar acquisitions, closing factories, opening new ones, studying numbers, forecasts, margins. Yet somehow, she had never learned why one father would go hungry, simply so his daughter could believe tomorrow would be better. As Rowan packed Lily's notebook into his worn backpack, Eleanor noticed something sticking out between the pages. A folded engineering blueprint. Old, yellowed, almost falling apart. One corner carried a faded company logo. Pierce Infrastructure Group. Her father's company. Her heartbeat slowed. That blueprint shouldn't exist. Because according to every corporate archive, that entire project had been destroyed 8 years earlier. She looked up sharply. Mr. Mercer, where did you get that drawing? Rowan followed her gaze. For the first time since she'd approached him, the calm expression disappeared from his face. He carefully folded the blueprint back into the notebook, then looked directly into Eleanor's eyes, and quietly said, I've been waiting 8 years. For someone brave enough to ask that question. The wind carried the smell of fresh rain as Rowan unlocked the faded blue door of his workshop. The building had once been an old railway maintenance shed. Now it served as everything: repair shop, storage room, office, sometimes even classroom, when Lily insisted on learning how broken things could be fixed. The hand-painted sign above the entrance simply read, Mercer Repair and Restoration. No website, no advertisements, just a phone number faded almost beyond recognition. Eleanor stepped inside a minute later. For someone who spent most of her life inside polished glass towers, the workshop felt strangely peaceful. The room smelled of cedar wood, machine oil, and fresh coffee. Shelves lined every wall, holding broken lamps, antique clocks, bicycles, kitchen appliances, children's toys, objects everyone else had thrown away. Objects Rowan had quietly given a second life. Lily disappeared toward the back room. I'm going to finish my homework. Rowan smiled. Don't stay up too late. She nodded before closing the small wooden door. Only then did Rowan face Eleanor. You wanted answers. She slowly looked around. Her eyes stopped on dozens of framed thank you letters pinned to one wall. No awards. No engineering certificates. No newspaper articles. Just handwritten notes. You fixed Mom's wheelchair for free. Thank you for repairing our church heater. My son still sleeps with the teddy bear you repaired. We could never repay your kindness. Eleanor quietly asked. You never charged them? Rowan shrugged. They paid what they could. And if they couldn't, they still needed things fixed. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Eleanor looked directly at him. My father fired you. It wasn't a question. Rowan nodded. No. He erased me. The words hung heavily between them. Eleanor frowned. What really happened? Rowan walked toward an old steel cabinet. From the bottom drawer, he removed a weathered leather folder. Its corners were cracked. The clasp barely held together anymore. He placed it gently on the workbench. I kept wondering if anyone would ever care enough to open this. Inside were dozens of documents, engineering drawings, inspection reports, signed approvals, internal emails. Every page carried the old Pierce Infrastructure logo. Eleanor slowly turned the first page, then the second. Her breathing became slower. Then suddenly, she stopped. One signature, near the bottom, her father's, Richard Pierce, approved. Below that, another document, rejected, signed, Rowan Mercer. Her eyes narrowed. This bridge, it collapsed. No, Rowan answered quietly, because I refused to let them build it. She looked up. What? He walked toward the window overlooking the empty street. 9 years ago, Pierce Infrastructure won the contract to build the East River Children's Hospital Bridge. It carried school buses, ambulances, families. I was lead structural engineer. Eleanor listened without interrupting. 3 months before construction, the finance department replaced the original steel supplier. Cheaper materials, higher profit. I reported the safety risks. They ignored me. I refused to approve the redesign. He reached into the folder again, this time removing a thick engineering report. My recommendation. Across the front, large red letters. Rejected. I told your father. If the bridge stayed unchanged, it wouldn't fail today. It would fail years later. Quietly, without warning, she whispered, and my father. Rowan's voice remained calm. He told me, nobody notices a bridge that stands. They only notice a company that misses deadlines. Silence. The workshop suddenly felt much colder. I resigned. They changed the paperwork. By Monday, the newspapers said I'd been dismissed for professional misconduct. My engineering license disappeared. No company would hire me. My career ended. Eleanor slowly lowered the report. Her father, the man she'd admired her entire life, had destroyed an innocent man's future. No, she whispered. He wouldn't. Rowan gently interrupted. You don't have to defend him. I'm not angry anymore. I've had 8 years to make peace with it. She looked around the workshop again. You built all this? After losing everything? He smiled faintly. I still had Lily. That was enough. Before Eleanor could answer, a loud knock echoed through the workshop. 3 sharp knocks. Not customers. Too deliberate. Rowan immediately recognized the rhythm. He quietly walked toward the door, opening it halfway. Standing outside were 2 men wearing expensive suits. Behind them, a black SUV. One man smiled professionally. Mr. Mercer, our employer would like a conversation. I already have company. I'm afraid. The second man stepped forward. It's important. Rowan glanced toward Eleanor. Their eyes met. She understood immediately. These men weren't there because of coincidence. One of them noticed Eleanor standing inside. His expression changed instantly. Miss Pierce, we didn't realize you were here. Eleanor stepped beside Rowan. Who sent you? The first man hesitated. Our chief operating officer, Mr. Damien Cross. The name hit her like ice. Damien, her father's closest executive. The man who had remained beside the company for nearly 15 years. The man she'd trusted completely. What does Damien want? The man reached inside his jacket, producing an envelope. No questions. He simply asked us to deliver this. Rowan accepted it, without opening it. The 2 men returned to the SUV. 30 seconds later, they were gone. Eleanor looked at the envelope. Open it. Rowan slowly unfolded the letter. Only 1 sentence, typed neatly across expensive paper. Some stories are safer when they stay buried. Name your price. No signature. No company logo. Nothing else. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. This is a bribe. Rowan folded the letter again. No, it's fear. She looked confused. What do you mean? He quietly walked toward another cabinet, unlocking it with an old brass key. Inside, not documents, not blueprints, hard drives, flash drives, boxes carefully labeled by year. Every single one organized. Every conversation, every inspection, every rejected report, every financial discrepancy. Eleanor stared silently. You've been collecting evidence. For 8 years. Rowan nodded once. I wasn't trying to destroy Pierce. I was trying to protect the people who still worked there. She looked at him in disbelief. You could have gone public. I could have. So why didn't you? His answer came instantly. Because innocent employees would have paid first. She had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, led hostile acquisitions, fired executives, closed factories. Yet standing inside this tiny workshop, she realized she'd never met a man whose strength looked so quiet. Then, Rowan removed one final folder, different from the others. Across the front someone had handwritten, "For Eleanor Pierce." She frowned. "My name. I wrote it. When? The day your father died." Her heartbeat quickened. "You expected me to come?" "No. I hoped. One day, you'd start asking the questions he never wanted answered." Eleanor slowly opened the folder. The very first page contained a single photograph. She recognized it instantly. It showed her father shaking hands with Damien Cross, 3 days before Rowan was fired. On the back, one handwritten sentence. This was the day they chose profit over truth. Before Eleanor could turn the next page, her phone rang. Board chairman. She answered. His voice exploded through the speaker. "Eleanor, where are you? The FBI is here. They're asking for Damien Cross. And nobody can find him." The line went dead. Rowan slowly looked toward Eleanor, then toward the folder still open in her hands. Finally, he said the words that changed everything. "He's running. Because he knows tomorrow morning, the whole company will finally learn who really built its empire on lies." The boardroom had never been this quiet. 32 executives sat around the polished walnut table on the 42nd floor of Aldridge Foods International. Outside the glass walls, helicopters circled above downtown. Inside, Nobody touched the coffee. Nobody checked their phones. Every chair was occupied, except one. Damien Cross's. The empty leather chair seemed louder than any accusation. At exactly 9 a.m., the elevator doors opened. Every head turned. Eleanor Pierce stepped into the room. She wasn't alone. Walking half a step behind her was Rowan Mercer. He wore the same faded flannel shirt, the same worn work boots, the same quiet expression. Several executives exchanged confused looks. One whispered, "That's the man from yesterday's charity event." Another frowned. "Why is he here?" No one had an answer. Eleanor reached the head of the table. Instead of sitting, she placed Rowan's old leather folder in the center. Then another, until nearly 20 folders covered the polished table. Every executive stared at them. The chairman finally broke the silence. "Eleanor, what exactly is this?" She looked around the room. "For 8 years. These documents have been hidden from every board member in this company." Murmurs spread instantly. The legal counsel leaned forward. "Hidden by whom?" Eleanor answered without hesitation. "By the man sitting in that empty chair." The room fell silent again. She pressed a button on the conference remote. The largest screen in the room lit up. Not with financial charts. Not with quarterly earnings. With engineering reports. Inspection failures. Internal emails. Approved supplier changes. Bank transfers. One after another, the truth appeared before everyone. Rowan remained silent. He wasn't there to make a speech. He had waited too many years for facts to finally speak louder than anger. The company's chief financial officer stood. "This can't be real." Rowan calmly slid an original signed document across the table. "You'll find the original approval stamp. The forensic team can verify the ink." The CFO picked it up. 30 seconds later, his face lost all color. "It's authentic." Another executive opened a different folder. Then another. Every page matched company records. Only these versions hadn't been altered. Someone whispered, "My God!" It was all covered up. Eleanor looked toward the chairman. "My father built this company. I'll always respect the years he sacrificed. But respect doesn't erase the truth. If he made mistakes, we fixed them. If crimes were committed, we faced them. No matter whose name is attached." No one argued, because no one could. Suddenly, the conference room doors burst open. 2 FBI agents entered with company security behind them. The lead agent spoke calmly. "Ms. Pierce, we've located Damien Cross." Everyone looked up. "Where?" The agent answered, "He was boarding a private jet. He didn't make the flight." Several executives lowered their heads. The room had changed forever. The agent continued, "We'll also need Mr. Mercer." Every eye shifted toward Rowan. "For questioning?" the chairman asked. The agent smiled. "No, for thanking." Confused expressions spread across the room. The agent placed a thick evidence binder onto the table. "Everything we recovered this morning matches evidence Mr. Mercer quietly submitted over the past several years." The room froze. Eleanor turned slowly. "You already contacted the authorities?" Rowan nodded once. "Years ago." She looked genuinely surprised. "Then why didn't they act?" "The evidence wasn't complete. I refused to accuse anyone until I could prove everything." The FBI agent smiled slightly. "Mr. Mercer probably saved this company. Without these records, we would have assumed the corruption reached the entire executive team. Instead, the investigation showed something very different. One executive, one network, years of manipulation, millions of dollars diverted, thousands of documents altered, and one man who never stopped keeping the truth alive." The chairman slowly stood, looking directly at Rowan. "I owe you an apology." Rowan answered softly, "You don't owe me anything. I didn't come for apologies. I came because employees deserve to work for an honest company." No applause followed, only silence, the kind earned through respect. 3 weeks later, The headlines spread across the country. Coup sentenced in multi-million-dollar corporate fraud case. Aldridge announces company-wide ethics reform. Whistleblower engineer cleared after 8 years. Television reporters gathered outside Rowan's workshop. He politely declined every interview. When journalists asked why, his answer was always the same. The story isn't about me. It's about making sure the next engineer isn't forced to choose between a paycheck and people's lives. Within days, engineering associations across the country officially restored Rowan's professional license. Several major firms offered him executive positions. One offered nearly $2 million a year. Another promised a vice president title. A third offered to relocate his family anywhere in the country. Rowan thanked each of them, then declined. Lily looked up from the kitchen table one evening. "Dad, why don't you want the big jobs?" He smiled while helping her with math homework. "Because I already have my favorite job." She laughed. "Fixing old toasters?" He chuckled. "No, being your dad." She wrapped her arms around him. "I hoped you'd say that." Meanwhile, Eleanor Pierce kept one promise she never announced publicly. Instead of launching another expensive advertising campaign, she quietly purchased the abandoned warehouse beside Rowan's workshop. 6 months later, it reopened, not as another corporate office, but as the Mercer Community Kitchen and Innovation Center. Every meal was free. Retired mechanics taught teenagers. Engineers volunteered on weekends. Single parents learned new job skills. Children finished homework after school. Nobody needed to prove they deserved help. If they walked through the door, they belonged. One afternoon, Mason and Emma arrived carrying backpacks. Emma smiled proudly. "We brought cookies." Lily laughed. "We already made too many." The 4 children disappeared into the kitchen together. Watching them, Eleanor quietly asked Rowan, "Do you ever wish things had happened differently?" He looked around the busy building. Parents laughing, children eating, volunteers repairing bicycles, neighbors sharing meals. Then toward Lily, who hadn't stopped smiling all afternoon. Finally he answered, "If my life had been easy, I might never have met the people who needed me." Eleanor nodded slowly. 4 years. "I thought success meant building the biggest company." Rowan smiled. "And now?" She watched Mason hand the last sandwich to an elderly veteran before making one for himself. Then she answered, "Now I think success is building a place where the last person in line never feels forgotten." Rowan didn't reply. He simply looked toward the doorway. The same maple tree from the charity event had been carefully transplanted beside the new community center. Its branches were already full of green leaves. Beneath it, children sat together eating lunch, laughing, sharing stories. No cameras, no speeches, no reporters, just people. Exactly as kindness was always meant to be. Lily quietly slipped her small hand into her father's. "Dad, remember when you told me tomorrow would be better?" He smiled. "I remember." She pointed toward the crowded community kitchen. "You were right." Rowan looked around one last time. 8 years earlier, he had lost his career, his reputation, nearly everything he had worked for, but he had never lost the one thing that mattered most, his character, and in the end, that proved stronger than every lie ever told against him. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with revenge. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when one hungry child notices another, whispers the truth, and reminds the world that real greatness is never measured by the size of a company, but by the size of a person's heart.